Hello Year 9 and welcome to exercise 8F, which is factorising monic quadratic trinomials. Now today we're getting into the nitty gritty, we're getting into the tricky ones, we're getting into the exciting ones, so strap in and enjoy. Now let's get a few terms sorted out. A quadratic trinomial, wow, that's a big term. Quadratic trinomial has three terms. And it always looks like this. So let's actually talk about what the quadratic trinomial has. It must have an x squared term. It's not quadratic if it doesn't have an x squared term. It has to have an x term and a constant or a number term, and sometimes it can be plus 0x plus 0. So let me draw some examples of quadratic equations. X squared plus 2x plus 3. Not a quadratic equation, sorry, a quadratic trinomial. And trinomial means it'll be made up of three parts. 1, 2, 3. Here's another quadratic trinomial. 3x squared minus 7x plus 11. Quadratic trinomial, it has an x squared part, an x part, and a number part. And you can put any number in front of the x squared, the x, or on the end. So A represents a number, B represents any number, and C represents any number. There's only one catch. A cannot be 0, because you can't have 0x squared, because if it was 0x squared, there'd be no x squared term, and it must have an x squared term to be quadratic. So let's see if we can talk about what's going to go on with these types of questions. We're only going to focus on, in exercise 8F, the easier types of quadratics. We'll do the harder ones later, and they're called monic quadratic trinomials. Now, a monic quadratic trinomial, well, trinomial, three terms. Quadratic has to have an x squared. Monic means in front of the x squared, it's the number 1, and we normally don't write the 1. So we just have x squared plus bx plus c. That's a monic quadratic trinomial. So here's some examples of monic quadratic trinomials. X squared plus 7x plus 2, x squared minus 4x minus 25, x squared minus 6x plus 11. Doesn't matter, as long as the number in front of the x squared is a 1, it's a monic quadratic trinomial. Now, how do we factorise a monic quadratic trinomial? Remember, factorising means let's work backwards and put the question back into bracketed form. Well, we need to find two numbers at times to give c. That's what factor pairs mean. Find two different numbers that times or factor to give this number on the end. Those two numbers then have to add to give this bit in the middle. And then we factorise into brackets. Now that might sound strange, but hopefully by doing a few questions, it'll become clear. Now if you find this tricky, that's normal. You do not have the right to complain or whinge until after you've done at least 100 of these. Once you've done 100 of them, if you're still finding them tricky, then we'll talk about it. But they are going to be tricky initially. So let's have a look at our first one. The question says, factorise a squared plus 6a plus 8. Now what we need to do is we need to focus on that last number first. We want two numbers at times to give 8 and add to give 6. That's what we're looking for, and that's what we're thinking about. So they want a times to give positive 8, and the two numbers have to add to give positive 6. Now you don't have to write this down to the side, but they've got two numbers at times together to give 8 and add together to give 6. Well, let's think of all the numbers at times to give 8. 1 times 8? Okay, 1 times 8. But let's check. We've got 1 times 8 here, but do those two numbers plus to give 6? Well, the numbers are 1 and 8, and 1 plus 8 does not add to give 6. It adds to give 9, so that's not an acceptable answer. Are there other numbers at times to give 8? Well, what about 2 times 4? Well, let's check what happens if I add 2 and 4. Hang on, 2 and 4 looks good because 2 times 4 gives 8. 2 and 4 times to give 8. And 2 plus 4 add to give 6. That's what I want. So those two numbers, 2 and 4, are the numbers that I'm going to put into my brackets. Each bracket will start with an A because the question has A's in it, and I'll have a 2 and a 4. Let's just check to see what actually happens if I expand those brackets out. What's A times A? A squared. What's A times positive 4? Positive 4A. What's 2 times A? Positive 2A. And what's 2 times 4? Positive 8. And if I look at that, that's A squared. 2A and 4A make 6A plus 8, which is what the question originally was. A squared plus 6A plus 8. So expanding means get rid of the bracket. Factorize means figure out what the two brackets were that would have multiplied together to give this answer. A lot trickier than timesing it out. Okay, let's look at part B. Now the trick is always to focus on the end number. You need numbers that times together to give 5 and add together to give 6. Now if you can think of them, fantastic. You don't have to write this down, but I want numbers that times together to give 5, and they've got to add together to give minus 6. They've got to add together to give minus 6. What are the numbers at times to give 5? Well, obviously 1 and 5. That's good. 1 times 5 is 5. But do 1 and 5 add to give minus 6? No, they add to give 6, not minus 6. So that's no good to me. What other numbers times to give 5? Well, there aren't any other whole numbers. Now, because there's a minus sign in the question, I need to be a little bit careful. Let's think about just tricking this or mixing this up a bit. What if I actually considered minus 1 and minus 5? What's negative 1 times negative 5? Positive 5, because a negative times a negative gives a positive. What's negative 1 when I add it to negative 5? It adds to give negative 6, which is what I want, which means negative 1 and negative 5 are the two numbers. So my brackets will be, both begin with A, and one will have a negative 1, and one will have a negative 5. If you actually wrote A take 5 first and A take 1 second, that's still correct. The order does not matter. Let's try part C. You're looking for numbers that times together to give negative 8, and they've got to add together to give negative 2. Well, I've got minuses in this, which means it's going to be a bit tricky. Now, if you can think of them in your head, that's fine. You can write the answer down straight away. But let's go through the process here, just in case you haven't thought of them. I want numbers at times to give minus 8, and they've got to add to give minus 2. Now, what are numbers at times to give minus 8? Let's try 1 and minus 8. See if that works. Yep, they times together to give minus 8, but what do they add to give? 1 added to minus 8 gives minus 7. That's not minus 2. That's no good. What if I mixed up the minus sign and put the minus sign first and did negative 1 times 8 instead of 1 times negative 8? Well, they still times to give negative 8, so it could be them, but they won't add to give minus 2. There's no way a negative 1 and a positive 8 can add to give negative 2, so they're no good. There must be other numbers at times to give 8. What about 2 times negative 4? Yes, 2 times negative 4 gives negative 8. 2 added to negative 4, 2 plus minus 4 adds up to minus 2. Good, I'm stopping. Don't keep going once you've got the answer. If it wasn't 2 and minus 4, I would have then checked minus 2 and plus 4. And I would have kept exploring until I got it. But I've got two numbers at times to give minus 8, 2 times negative 4, that add to give minus 2. 2 added to negative 4 gives minus 2. That's what I want. So, a double set of brackets. Each bracket begins with x. One bracket has a plus 2. The other bracket has a minus 4. There's your answer. If you wrote x take 4 in brackets followed by x plus 2 in brackets, that would also be correct. The order of the brackets does not matter. Right, let's try part D. Hang on, this is a trick question because it's not written in the right order. Notice I've got the y squared part, but then I've got the number part and the y part last. You always have to have the letter part squared first, then the letter part by itself, and the number part on the end. The -4 should be on the end. So I need to rearrange this question. That's much better. Y squared first, positive 3y second, -4. Now it's written as a quadratic trinomial in the correct order for me to factorize. I want numbers that times together to give -4, that add together to give 3. If you can think of them, you can write the answer down straight away, and you'll start to be able to do that with practice. But I'm going to go through the process slowly in case you couldn't do that. I want numbers that times to give -4 and add to give +3. Let's think, what are numbers that times to give -4 and add to give 3? Let's try 1 times -4. 1 times -4 times to give -4. When I add them, 1 added to -4 gives -3. That's not good enough. It doesn't add to give -3. They add to give... Sorry, they don't add to give 3, they add to give -3, so that's not what I'm after. Let's try mixing my minus sign around. Put a -1 and then a +4. -1 times 4, yes, that gives -4. What happens when -1 is added to 4? That gives me 3. That's what I want. So, they're the numbers I'm interested in. So each bracket will begin with a y. One bracket will have a -1, and one bracket will have a 4. Now, I've just written down here the other combination. I don't know why I wrote that. You could have tried 2 and -2, but it wouldn't have worked. And don't actually try them. Once you've got the answer, stop. And again, you don't even have to write any of this down if you can think about it in your head. So we've got our answer there, y take 1 and y plus 4. Could have been y plus 4 and y take 1, that's okay. Let's continue on to example 2. Now example 2 is a trick question because it's not monic. There's a number in front of the x squared. That's no good. That makes it much harder. So let's see if there's a common factor. Yes, there is, because 2 goes into 2x squared, 2 goes into -2x, and 2 goes into -12. 2 goes into each term. So let's take out 2 as a common factor. 2 goes into 2x squared. Well, 2 goes and leaves the x squared. When I take the 2 out, 2 goes into 2 once, so you get -1x. 2 goes into -12 -6 times. So that's what it factorizes down to. Look inside the bracket. That is a monic quadratic trinomial now. I want numbers at times to give -6 that add to give -1. So let's see what I want. Numbers at times to give -6 that add to give -1. Let's think of numbers at times to give -6. What about 1 and -6? Yep, but they don't add to give -1. What about -1 and +6? Yeah, they don't add to give -1. Must be other numbers at times to give 6. What about 2 and -3? Yes, and they also add together to give -1. So they're the ones I want. 2 and -3. Which means that in my brackets, I have both brackets start with an x, and I get a 2 and a -3. But out front of both brackets, because I took out a common factor of 2, I'll need to make sure I keep that 2 out the front, and there are my 2 brackets. Now, the answer could also have been written like this. 2, x take 3, x plus 2, it wouldn't matter. So either of those are fine. It's now time for you to try some questions. You're going to be continuing this next class as well. Take your time, master the concept, and if you do finish it early, ask, and there are some extra exciting questions for you to do to build up your skill in this area. This is something I'd like you to be able to do very quickly. It will take practice to get fast at it. Good luck and enjoy.